Hey everyone, thank you for joining the session today. I really appreciate it. Um, just a note as we get started here. I've got the chat box pulled up, so if at any point in time you have questions or comments that you want to add, feel free to add that to the chat box, and I will monitor that. And if it's a question, I'll try to address it right then. But if it's just a comment and you want to interact with each other in the session, that's perfectly fine as well. I like to encourage that in all of my synchronous classes. So thank you, Molly, for the introduction. I am at Coastal Carolina University. I've been there for 4 years now, and I teach in the English department, primarily new media courses and graduate writing courses. But I got my start in first year writing courses, teaching composition, 101 and 102. And what we're talking about today is the program that we developed in 2014, or actually before that, we launched it in 2014, that centered on digital badging. And it completely revolutionized the way that we teach our first year writing courses and the way that students receive credit for those courses. And ever since then, ever since 2014, we've been, myself and Dr. Pastor, Denise Pastor, have been going around talking about our initiative and how digital badges work and how we're using them. And what I hope for you to get out of today's session is potentially maybe how you could use digital badges in your context at your institution. So what is a digital badge when I'm talking about badges? There's quite a bit of confusion out there about digital badges or badges in general. I like to use the phrase digital badge specifically. Most people just refer to badging or badges. But there is a slight difference, and I use the haystack definition, and we like to talk about badges as indicators of accomplishments. There is a negative stigma that surrounds digital badging, mostly because people tend to equate badges with things like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, where badges are given out in many cases for participatory activities. So, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but the way that we use badges is not for engagement or participation, but as indicators of accomplishment. So they're actually competency-based rather than just recognizers of participation. And that's the big stigma that we run up against, and we'll get to that in a second. But the digital badge itself really just is a sort of JPEG looking thing that is issued to the badge earner, and it includes a bunch of different metadata. Depending on which program you would use to use badging, it includes things like who issued the badge, that's the issuer, the skill that's being certified, what are we certifying with this badge, and the overall overarching institution that sort of backs that badge. And so within the JPEG, the design that we use, we try to include all three of those things, the issuer, the skill, and the institution, so that the person earning the badge can then transfer that later on into something else, whether it's potentially into a transfer situation to another university, or sometimes students will share these different badges to social media or to their LinkedIn profiles or things like that. So we're giving credibility with our badges is what we're trying to establish. So what is the Coastal Composition Commons? Great, I will fix that, Molly, thank you. What is the Coastal Composition Commons? We refer to it as the CCC. Here's how it worked, and you can visit the website if you'd like as I'm talking about this and peruse yourself. But we sold it to the Faculty Senate as the 4th credit hour for these English 101 and English 102 courses. So to set it up, all of our incoming freshmen take English 101 in the first semester and 102 in the second semester, and combined we call that the first year writing program. English 101 is your typical composition writing course, and English 102 is a composition and critical thinking analysis, critical reading and analysis course. So what we said was these traditionally 3-hour courses are going to be transformed into 4-hour courses. That fourth credit hour is going to be consisting of what we call the CCC. So students participate in this digital badge program for credit. They received this fourth credit hour for this. So it took this first year program from 6 credit hours to 8 credit hours. And it really changed everything institution-wide, because this impacted everything from student schedules to tuition, financial aid assistance, faculty salary and pay, specifically adjunct faculty, because they were now teaching more credit hours, but they were teaching the same number of courses. So it really had wide-ranging impacts across the institution when we did this. We refer to it as a performance-based assessment model. So yes, we're using digital badges, but what we're ultimately doing with these badges is we're assessing writing. So we refer to it as an assessment model. We also use this as an opportunity to use multimodality as often as possible. We have video, interactive text, everything's digitally based, and it's all mobile friendly, so students can interact with the site in class when the instructor is giving them directions to do so. And the way that we designed each of the badges, which we'll get to in a second, is we took each of the student learning outcomes from these 2 courses and we parsed them into skills. So we looked at, let's say, SLO number 1, and we said, what are we asking these students to be able to demonstrate? What do we want them to show us that they can do? And perhaps it's something like writing a definitive thesis, or clearly summarizing a text, or paraphrasing, or quoting. We parsed these outcomes out into individual skills. And that's how we arrived at each of the badges. Each course has, English 101 and English 102 have their own separate badges, and we'll see those in a second. We developed these badges as a department. So while the program was conceptualized and developed by myself and Dr. Pastor, we did so in 2013. We actually asked the English department faculty, tenured and non-tenured, to come together and help write these digital badges together so that they have some ownership and some stake in this program. And that is one of the biggest takeaways that I would recommend for you if you're considering doing something similar, is including as many faculty as possible so that they do have some type of ownership in this. Otherwise, the faculty buy-in will be extremely difficult. And honestly, it probably will be so regardless. But at least in this sense, you can give them an opportunity to help write the badges. We also use the badges as a sort of secondary use to document professional development. So faculty actually are assigned digital badges for meeting certain benchmarks. So for publication, for presentation, and for service, they're given different badges. And the reason that we do this is not just to sort of award them for let's say, publishing something, but it's the metadata that's important with the digital badging. So within, let's say, a faculty member has a publication in a peer-reviewed journal. The badge would be a publication badge, or it's actually called the scholarly badge. Within that badge, it has a link to the document. It might even include the original document that was published as PDF form, the date that it was earned, any additional information that they'd like to include, maybe a description or explanation of the project. And so all of this information becomes archived into that faculty member's PD portfolio. And so it's all there. And when it comes time for annual review or tenure review, we can look back at that portfolio and sort of assess from there. And we have all of the relevant information available to us. This is, I would say, probably the more common use of digital badging is for professional development or training. A lot of universities utilize badges in their learning centers or their academic excellence centers or professional development centers. In English 101, we have 8 different badges. So we looked at those student learning outcomes and decided, you know what, we're asking them to demonstrate 8 different skills in doing these outcomes. And so that's how we arrived at the 8 different badges. They include things like summarizing, paraphrasing, quoting, which are the more basic ones, and then more higher level thinking badges like synthesizing, which is probably the most difficult one to earn. In English 102, we have 7 currently, so we have 1 fewer badge in that course. But the badges are also arguably more difficult to earn. This is a little bit of a higher level course, so it requires a little bit more from the students. So we're asking them to do things like critique or synthesize at a higher level. And so the idea behind this is, again, we're looking at the student learning outcomes for English 102 and saying, what do we want them to be able to do? And this is what we decided as a department. We also have additional badges that students can earn, and faculty, it's dependent on the faculty member how they use these, if at all, but they're available. So we have different things. I think we just added one for MLA and APA, things like that. These are more like resource-based, so you can point students in the direction of like an MLA badge and say, if you complete this badge, that it will teach you how to, let's say, properly format your paper, how to include in-text parenthetical citations, how to format a works cited page, things like that. We also have some different things here like Writing Center and selfie badges, which some people issue. I've issued these in the past for students who attend extracurricular events that I've asked them to do. So let's say attending a cultural event, a play, or something on campus, either for extra credit or for as part of an analysis assignment. And one of the things that students love to do is to earn these different badges. For example, the extracurricular or the Writing Center badge, students have to attend a writing session in the Writing Center with one of the consultants, and they have to take a selfie and essentially prove that they were there with the consultant. So this is optional, of course, but students really gravitate towards this. They love to do it. They love to share it. And really the only one who sees it is the instructor for that course, unless they share it publicly. So it's a nice way to, again, bring technology into the classroom and have them utilize their own devices to, essentially show us that they're working hard and that they're dedicated to the course. So these are just a few of the pictures that we've received in the last couple of days. As I mentioned, for the professional development badges, these are the 3 that faculty earn. So these are the 3 sort of benchmarks that we're looking for in faculty: scholarly work, including publication and presentation; service, so serving on committees and things like that; and then teaching. So to earn each of these badges, you can assign these badges to yourself, or you can be assigned by someone else. And again, they include the relevant information and documentation. So for, let's say, a teaching badge, you could include things like student evaluations, things like that. So it's a nice way to archive your own performance. So how did we design the site? And I'll show you the site. I'll give you a demonstration in a minute, but it's actually very easy to use because we use 2 independent programs, Credly and BadgeOS. Those are the 2 things that you'll need to have in addition to a WordPress site. You can use the free version of WordPress. So all in all, the badging program is free, outside of the cost of time and human labor. But the site itself is free, and you really don't need to have extensive programming experience or anything like that to be able to implement it right away. That's the nice thing about BadgeOS, which is a plugin that goes into the WordPress site that basically generates all of the automation that you need for the site to work. So let's say a student submits something for it to be evaluated. Once it's evaluated, it's BadgeOS that actually generates things like the emails that go back and forth to the student or the faculty member, and make sure that the badge is dedicated to that student's backpack and things like that. So it's very hands-off from a user perspective because of the BadgeOS plugin. We use Credly, which is, again, a free badging service. There are lots of these out there now. When we started designing the site 5 years ago, Credly seemed to be one of the more credible ones out there, but now there are a whole host of similar programs that you can use for free. And you can use your badging site on Credly's site if you don't want to go to the lengths of creating your own WordPress site and building this from the ground up. You can actually use these other sites to do all of this for you. The benefit, of course, of doing it yourself is that you don't have to redirect students to an outside program like Credly and have them create a login and things like that. You can host it all internally. And it also works well with an LMS, any LMS that you use, Moodle or Canvas or anything. You can directly integrate these things into that LMS. So that's how we built the site. So if you were thinking about building your own site, you can go to WordPress today, find a template that you like, use it, customize it, create an account with Credly, design your own badges there even, and then install the BadgeOS plugin, and it can be up and running today. So I think I'll give you a demo of the site itself. Let's see. Hopefully you can see this well enough. I should ask, I'll take a second and ask if you have any questions at this point. You can type it in the chat box or you can speak up. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. I'll try to tackle those as we go. Here's the homepage for the site, and you can visit it. You know what? I'll post it in the chat box if you want to go there. The nice thing about this, and we did this deliberately, is that it is an open resource for others to use. So essentially what we're offering on this site is writing instruction for these different things. It's available to anyone who visits the site. The only caveat is that users outside of Coastal Carolina cannot actually submit their work for it to be evaluated. But in terms of all of the instructional text and videos and things like that, it's available to anyone. So we've had several institutions come to us and sort of partner and use this site as an online resource, sort of like the Purdue OWL or something like that. So in the homepage, students log in and they can go to their respective badge page. So if they're in 101 or 102, they would go there. And for 101, you have a whole list of those badges that I showed you. So they're all here, and you can see some are darkened and some are a little more opaque, and that's because this account has earned some of these badges already. So earned badges are darkened, like the quoting badge, and ones that are yet to be earned are still sort of opaque. So students would go to the badge that their instructor directs them to. So the way this works is, let's suppose the instructor is working on summarizing a text that week in class. They might want the students to complete the summarizing badge before they get into their assignment or before they begin drafting a paper or something like that. They can work on these skills ahead of time. So the instructor would tell students, go to the summarizing badge, work on that badge. And the way that instructors address this varies, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The way that I would do this when I was teaching these courses is I would introduce the material that we were working on that week, and we would do the badges up front. And I would ask them to compose drafts of the assignments. So let's say synthesizing, since that's a little bit more difficult. If we were working on, we were going to be reading 2 texts and I was going to be teaching synthesizing, I would say, please visit the synthesizing badge and read the text and compose a draft, bring that draft to class. So they might go to the synthesizing badge, they'd visit the badge page, which looks like this, and there's an instructional text that is presented to them. This one doesn't have a whole lot of multimedia like others do, but it has a little. And all the badges are structured similarly. So it describes what the skill is, why you should do it, what it looks like. We provide modeling. Some of the badges themselves, we have faculty members on camera discussing them and giving them a sort of mini lecture on what it is. This one in particular gives them some examples, a modeling example of a great example of synthesis, and then step-by-step instructions on how to do this. So giving them examples of how to synthesize texts. We also give them suggestions like this matrix that we ask them to do, which is, this is one way that you could potentially synthesize. So we give them a bunch of different exercises and tips and things like that. At the end of every badge, there's an assignment. This is the part that is assessed by faculty. So the assignment for this particular badge asks them to do 3 steps. And actually all of the badges have these 3 steps where we ask them to respond to the assignment or to the text. And this one in particular is asking them to create a matrix like the one above in a text box, and write a paragraph incorporating information from both sources, doing specific things, and then reflect on that. So it has 3 phases to this assignment. Students would compose this in Microsoft Word, any word processor. And then in my example, I asked them to compose their draft and bring it to class. And then we address this in class. We might do a peer review. We might share out loud. We might do some of these things together, but we really sort of work through this together as a class rather than just independently. And I'll explain why in a little bit. But when students have gotten feedback either from me or from a peer, and they feel confident that their submission will be accepted, then they can actually just attach their document to this badge, click submit, and it goes into the instructor's inbox for him or her to grade. We have a very generic rubric that we use for all of the badges. It's the same, and it just explains essentially what a badge that's accepted would look like and one that would be denied, what that would be. So the rubric is sort of generic, but we do so in a way that it remains consistent across all of the badges. So for example, things like egregious spelling or mechanical or punctuation or grammatical errors throughout the assignment, throughout the writing, if it's unoriginal or it doesn't address all of the steps in the assignment, things like that. So that's what the student does, and that's where the student's job sort of ends. They can submit their work and then just wait. And as you can see in the instructor view at the bottom, this doesn't show up for the students, only instructors, but the badge would then show up for that instructor. So I can see here that the professor is Roger Johansson. This student, Samuel Liddell, submitted this badge. The file is right here called Digital Badge 6 Synthesizing, when it was uploaded, and you can click on it and open it up and see it. The instructor at this point would open the document and evaluate it and essentially decide whether it should be accepted or denied. And once that decision is made, the instructor clicks approve or deny. That's it. Again, instructors vary on how they use the program. So we do have some instructors who provide feedback in the text box here. So they might explain why a badge was denied or why it was accepted and how it could be improved. We do have other instructors who like to comment on the original submissions using things like track changes, and then resubmit or return the document back to the student with those changes and say, you know what, I'm denying this badge, but here's what you need to fix, and you can resubmit. Students can resubmit as many times as they like in the program. The program allows for this, but it's up to the instructor's policy whether or not they allow resubmissions. So I would say most instructors allow multiple submissions. So if a badge was denied, the student can go back and fix that badge and resubmit it. In my case, I did not allow resubmissions because I found that students often would sort of shop my grade. They would half-heartedly complete the assignment and submit it, hoping that it would be approved, and if it wasn't, they would just have another chance to submit. So to counter that, I would spend more time on the front end of drafting a response and doing a peer review on this response and giving my feedback on the response, and then at that point asking the student to submit as the very last step. And if it was approved, it would be approved, but if it was denied, that was the end of the road. So these are all different approaches that people have to the badges. And that's one of the things that we learned is each instructor has a different policy and a different approach to how they grade badges, how they accept badges, and things like that. So it really depends on the instructor. The question in the chat box about other programs. Yes, I always say when I'm doing these presentations that we are using digital badging in a very odd way. Honestly, digital badges don't really lend themselves to English and writing as much as they do other disciplines, in my opinion. I think they're extremely useful in things like professional development or in certifying hard skills. So for gen ed competency, that's a wonderful use. But I mean, for things like, let's say, I don't know, proficiency in Microsoft Office, things like that, hard skills that you can then certify. I think they have great utility. How we're using them is very abstract. We're asking students to demonstrate things like synthesis and critique and analysis, and that's how we're recognizing their competency. But badges, we're using it with English, but badges really have greater utility in all sorts of other disciplines. It's just up to you how you want to use it. And really, the way that we address badging is that we are certifying their competency. So they're indicators of accomplishments, right? So if a student can indicate to us that she can do something, then that's why the badge is earned. So it's a bit of a stretch, I think, for English to use it, but it can be done for sure, because there are hard skills in writing that we can certify. We can certify certainly, what a good thesis looks like, or if quoting is done properly. Those are things that we can certify and that we can agree upon. So the student, let's say this badge was approved. The student would receive an email saying, congratulations, your badge is approved. Here it is. It sends them a JPEG of the badge, but it also then drops the badge in that student's backpack. So the student has a backpack that she accumulates, and it shows all of the earned badges. And again, the metadata that is included with that badge includes the original submission that she submitted for that, any of the instructor's comments or anything like that, date, time, issuer, stuff like that. So the other question, changing the language from badges to some Leslie, right? Yeah. So we, as I've said, we when we talk about badges, especially in the very beginning, we referred to this program as a performance-based assessment model. So that's what we would always say is the assessment model. It's an assessment model. It's not badges. It's an assessment model. Because there is definitely a stigma attached to badges. And literally, we stood in front of faculty senate and had people from other disciplines say, the quote, the funny quote that would go around was like, badges, we don't need no stinking badges, and it was like, haha, we heard it every single time we gave a presentation on badges. So we would try to stay away from using the word badges. Eventually, that's what people would recognize we were doing, but we were trying to get across that we're actually asking students to prove to us they can, or demonstrate that they can do these things. And then once they do, they are given this thing. But people often confuse badges with participatory awards. So badges often, especially in K-12, are used to do things like recognize like attendance, or bringing their books to class, or being on time to class, or something like that. They might get a badge. And that's certainly not how we're using them. So we do try to separate ourselves from that. So yeah, the language was problematic in the beginning. There's been a lot of work done since then to help shape the image of digital badges and how they're used. Mozilla has done a lot of work with this. The Mozilla Backpack is a really useful tool if you wanted to get into this today. But yeah, you're right. Backpack can be problematic. We tend to use the word student profile instead of backpack, but it's sort of semantics at this point. For the instructor has a submissions tab that he or she can view all of their students who have submitted badges. They can go through and they can approve and deny the badges. Here's an example of that synthesizing badge. Let's say a student submitted this as her submission for the synthesis badge. You can see she's doing the matrix that we asked her to do. She was reading the texts that we asked her to read, and now she's giving a response. And this is what we would assess. This is what we would evaluate and then decide whether or not to approve or deny that submission. Another option that faculty tend to use is something called the digital badge forgiveness thing, which is a sort of template that we recommend faculty use. So we're saying, if you're going to deny a student's badge, but you want them to resubmit that badge, it becomes sort of problematic with the system because it doesn't show that it's a second submission for that student. It's just another submission. So what we ask students to do is copy and paste the original text that was denied, and then explain what you changed in this second submission, and then include a second submission below. So students who resubmit their documents often will use this template so that for the instructor it's easier to see what changes were made, and then at that point you can decide whether or not you'd like to approve or deny it. So just getting back to how we use the site. The instructors, as you can tell, have a lot of flexibility in terms of how they use this site, and that was intentional. We turned to digital badges because we did not want the rigidity of something like a canned program, that some of the higher education companies provide. Pearson, McGraw-Hill, things like that have very rigid programs that you really don't have a whole lot of control over. You don't have a whole lot of customization. We wanted customization, but we did not want standardization. We wanted consistency, but not standardization. So with the badge site, faculty can sequence the badges in any way that they want. They can address summarizing first. They can start with synthesizing. They can start with any of those badges in any way at any point in the semester. What we've found through a couple of studies is that there tends to be a natural sequence that our faculty adopt sort of coincidentally. Not that it's mandated, but there does seem to be a natural sequence that they use. Usually starting with the easier badges and ending with the more difficult badges at the end of the semester. That tends to be how it is. In terms of the grades, how this factors into the grade. Remember, this program counts as a quarter of that class. In other words, it's a fourth credit hour. So we ask that instructors incorporate the badge program as anywhere from 18 to 24% of their final grade. So the final grade is comprised of these digital badges, but not entirely. In the beginning, we experimented with saying, you know what, these badges, they're the student learning outcomes. And so if students aren't earning the badges, they shouldn't pass the class. But what we found was that was very problematic because, that's not how we grade we don't assess students that way in other courses. So we backed off a little bit and we said, you know what, the grades just need to account for a percentage, essentially sort of a fourth of their grade. The pedagogical approach, again, varies. Instructors can use this any way they want. They can, as I mentioned, use, oh no. My presentation cut out. They can use peer review. They can draft it in class. I will say that the most successful use of the program is when instructors integrate the badges into their curriculum, into their classroom. We know that when instructors just assign badges extraneously and just say like, do that badge over the weekend and come back. Badges don't tend to help the students very well, and students tend to resent the badges. So the badges only really work well when they're integrated into the curriculum, into the course. And that was sort of problematic for faculty because we had nearly 80 different instructors, primarily contingent faculty. So we had a lot of adjunct instructors teaching these courses. More than 4,000 students, a couple of hundred sections of 101 and 102. So we asked ourselves, what in the world are these students getting from these courses and how different are their experiences? And we looked at it in the very beginning and they were wildly different. Some of these students had wildly different experiences in their English 101 courses, some good, some not so good. So that was the impetus for the badge program. We could use this as a way to create consistency across these courses to ensure that these students were getting the same types of instruction without mandating or standardizing a sort of course in a can approach. We've collected some of the data. So since the beginning of the program, fall of 2014 through 2016, more than 100,000 submissions. So one of the biggest hurdles to this program was the increased workload for faculty. Students, it turns out, didn't really mind. They didn't really mind doing the work. They were already doing this type of work. They didn't mind using the program. There's been hardly any usability issues with students. But the one hurdle that we've come across is that faculty view this as additional work, and it is. That's 103,000 documents that needed to be read and assessed, right? That's a lot of work. And the one thing that we've learned is that in the beginning, faculty were trying to implement this program in addition to how they were already teaching their course, right? They were keeping their course the same exact way, and they were trying to use these badges in addition to that, and that resulted in work overload for these teachers, especially if you're teaching 4 sections of an English course. That's a lot of submissions that you're having to grade. What we've learned and what faculty have learned most importantly is that it can't work that way. the badge system has to be integrated into the course. The syllabus has to be reworked to include these things. So where you have other activities and assignments that you've been using for years, you might consider replacing that with one from the badge site. And the badge site is set up in a way that we give optional texts. So for the synthesizing badge, for example, we give suggestions and we say, here's a text that you can synthesize. But we also include a note that says, if your instructor has another text that he or she would like you to use or read instead for this assignment, you should do that. So the texts are interchangeable. And that's what we find instructors do. The badge site doesn't force them to change the content or the approach of their entire course. It's just teaching the skill. They can insert their own texts if they'd like. So the badges that they've earned in order of frequency earned are really no surprise. The ones that are most earned are from English 101, followed by the ones from English 102. The most difficult badges to earn tend to be the synthesizing badges. So those are earned the fewest number of times. We did a study on intrinsic motivation in the beginning of the program. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions about digital badging, is that it's a motivator, right? Is that if you attach a badge to anything, students are going to want to do that thing, and they're going to want to earn that badge. I would caution extremely against this way of thinking, because as we saw, and I think we were guilty of thinking this way in the beginning too, but as we saw, badges really didn't make an impact on motivation. We looked at expectancy value. So quickly, expectancy value is the expectation that a student has for a course and the value that that student places on that course. So you can imagine a student coming into English 101, there are different types of students. You do have students who come in who expect to do really well in that course, and they value it. They enjoy it. They might be an English major, whatever. There are also students who come in who maybe don't expect to do that well. Maybe they didn't receive great grades in English in high school, and they don't expect to do well in this course. They might expect to get a C, and they don't really value writing as much as other students. That student would have a low expectancy value. What we were hoping was that badges might help raise those students up with low expectancy values. But instead, what we saw was that the digital badges significantly helped the students who already had expectancy value. So in other words, if the student wanted to do well in the course to begin with, then badges helped motivate that student to do so. But if the students didn't expect to do well, or they didn't really value the course all that much, badges not only didn't help them and motivate them to do well, in some cases it actually harmed them even more. So it's a cautionary tale. It really widened the gap between the high and low learners. The question about exporting their badges. We also anticipated in the beginning that students would just share these badges to all of their social media, LinkedIn, everything. And what we've seen is that there's very little of that. And I think that's because of the discipline. There's really there's no need for them to share their summarizing badge on LinkedIn, right? It's not really going to help them. Now, if the discipline was something within technology, and it was like, hey, here's a badge for Photoshop or After Effects or Microsoft Office or something, that would have extremely high value to share on social media sites. So if it were a different discipline, I think there would be a lot more sharing going on. But because we're asking them to do things like analysis and synthesizing, there's not a whole lot of sharing externally from our students. In the interest of time, I won't really go into the social annotation thing, but each page we also have integrated the hypothesis widget, which allows students to annotate all of the pages so they can highlight, they can make comments. I require my students to do this as they read the text, because as you saw, some of those pages on the instructional text, those web pages can get pretty long and pretty wordy. So asking them to annotate those pages as they read is something that I tend to require of my students, and they can have conversations that way. I tend to use that over discussion boards. So that's embedded on there. And if you're interested in that, I'll just type a little plug here for Hypothesis. But Hypothesis is a great social annotation program that you can use. You can embed it in any website, and it's great to use. So if you're interested in knowing how to do this type of thing, I have a little flow chart for you to consider. There are lots of standalone badge sites that you could use beginning today. You can start and just go from there. You could use badge sites individually in your course and just go that way, or you can consider badges more programmatically, institution-wide, that sort of approach. Oh yeah, Molly. Yeah, I'm deeply involved with Hypothesis, so we can talk about that later. I'm writing a text right now with them. So it depends on how you want to use badges, but I think for the moment you should maybe step back, and if you're interested in using badges, you should step back and think why you would want to use badges in the first place. If it's strictly for motivation purposes, then I would recommend not using badges. But if it's for a way to certify and recognize achievements more visibly, then badges could work for you. If it's a way to help document or archive student work or make it more visible to others, then badges can service that function as well. I tend to like Credly and BadgeOS. I think they work really well together. The WordPress site, as I mentioned, is free. We just build it from the ground up. We can customize it at any point in time. We've asked every year, so at the end of every spring semester, we hold workshops with faculty to help revise the site. So the site is under constant revision. We are constantly looking at it for things, issues with usability or content or updating, making sure that things are reading clearly. We ask for a lot of student feedback on the site so that it can then be changed, or we ask for feedback on the readings and things like that. We're in the process of collecting and creating more and more multimedia that's student driven. So asking students to compose multimedia videos, instruction, reflection, things like that, so that can be included in the site itself. Students tend to respond really well to other students talking about the website rather than faculty sort of imposing it on them. So I really highly recommend using digital badges as a way to sort of enforce consistency. Remember, these are representative of the student learning outcomes. They're not just participatory to earn these badges. 9 minutes, gotcha. I'll just move on to the challenge part. Some things that we've learned. There's really no way to regulate plagiarism so far on the website. There's no way to do this. The only way to combat plagiarism is by having them draft and bring them to class and review and peer review and give feedback and things like that. That's how you can combat plagiarism. But other than that, there is a real danger of students sharing work. For instance, if you know something's been approved by an instructor, it could potentially float around and have other students submit it. That's why I highly recommend drafting in class and reviewing that way. The value of badges also is a question that's up in the air for us. In other words, what happens to these badges after they complete their first year writing program and they earn these badges? What happens? Where do they go? Are they shared? Are they useful? What's the transferability to other institutions? And as of right now, there really isn't any. there's really no transferability. We're looking at options with transcripts and things like that. We have had cases where students have transferred, and when their newer institution is requesting syllabi from their courses that they've taken, like English 101, we can provide the digital badges and what was submitted, and that's very helpful in terms of actual transfer for students. But beyond that, in terms of sharing, things like that, we're still sort of working that out. And I think, again, that has to do with the discipline. So I wanted to get to your questions, if you have any. There's my contact information. You can email me. We can set up a time to talk. We can I can help you work through your system or your program if you want to do that at some point. I'm gonna cut it off there so Molly can move on. But please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk about this or to assist in any endeavor that you're working on. And thank you so much for attending the session.